When you hear the phrase soft as steel, what do you think of? While the word steel might conjure up images such as massive high rise buildings, where does the soft part come in? And what exactly does this mean in our work and in our lives? Welcome to the Soft as Steel podcast with your host, Dennis Duran, featuring engaging conversations with a wide range of industry leaders around soft skills, how we practice love, inclusion, social justice, and compassionate leadership that's everlasting in the workplace. And now, here's Dennis Duran.
Today is a special day. I've had the good fortune of working with and maintaining connection to my guests for over 22 years. Dr. Gretchen Gagel is a highly respected thought leader with 40 years in construction and the founder of Women Thriving in Construction, a global institute. That may be a hint about some of the things we're going to talk about in our conversation today. With degrees in mechanical engineering, an MBA, and a PhD in leadership and change agility, Gretchen brings unmatched expertise to the industry. Her journey began on the production floor of Ralston Purina and Coca-Cola. For most of her career journey, Gretchen was fulfilling more than one role brilliantly. She was engaged in a wide range of interests. Her career is marked by her dedication to leadership, organizational performance, and the advancement of women in the workforce. One of many examples of her pursuits is her serving as the former chair of Brinkman Construction. Perhaps the most important role, author of the soon-to-be published book, Building Women Leaders, a Blueprint for Women Thriving in Construction. Join us as we explore her journey and insights on empowering women in construction and other things as well that are important for our conversation. Gretchen, so glad to have you with me today on the Soft as Steel podcast.
Dennis, it's always such a pleasure to spend time together. 22 years. Wow. It's remarkable when you start adding up all the time that we've known each other.
Yeah, it's a big number
Yeah.
and it's going up. It's rolling up. I just had a visit with another good mutual friend of ours that you probably could guess what I'd be talking about, even if I didn't mention his name. But I had a conversation with him last evening, and it's always good to connect with him, Mr. MB. Let's go with MB. You know who I'm talking about. All right. So obviously, again, one of the things has been really just a hallmark of your entire career and fulfilled in a variety of ways, as I've observed it from a distance, is that you're not just an accomplished individual. You're not someone who's held many positions, advised Fortune 100 companies, advised small contractors, led consulting group. You've done so many things, but there's been a thread running through all of that, a thread that really wasn't topical or there wasn't enough courage to talk about it 22 years ago. And that is the fact that you're not just an accomplished person in construction, you are an accomplished woman in construction. And you've been carrying that as an interest of yours from your very early days, I would suspect. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And as we sit here having this conversation, and as you know, I have four things that are ingredients in every conversation I have. In some way, I talk about love in every conversation. I talk about inclusion. I talk about social justice. And obviously, then I wrap it all together by talking about leadership. And we know that as we're having this conversation today, we'll record it. We could play it 3, 4, 5 years from now. And I'll say it this way, and I want you to react to this. Unfortunately, we may be talking about the concerns about opportunities for women in construction in a manner not dissimilar to how we're going to talk about in the next 35 minutes. Your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. No, I'd absolutely agree with that. And it's interesting, Dennis, because writing the book was a very interesting journey. Obviously, I have a PhD in leadership. And so I've taken a lot of time to learn about leadership, and I've been CEO, managing director for companies. But I never in my early days really thought, oh gosh, I'm going to go be a trailblazer. When Ralston Purina hired me as their first female operations manager, 63 men, 62 men and me, I didn't think, well, I kind of thought, well, somebody's got to go do this, right? Somebody's got to be woman number one to do this. But then when I was in the job, I wasn't thinking, go blaze a trail. I was just thinking, how am I a good production manager? Ralston Purina let 40% of their trainees go after the first year. And so it was just nose to the grindstone, learn how to run a plant. And then when I joined FMI, it was learn how to be a management consultant and learn the construction industry. And then I fell in love with the construction industry, and that's what made me stay. I have such regard for the people who so humbly build and maintain the assets of civilization. And if, when what hits the fan, it's not And I have a degree in finance, so I shouldn't say this. It's not the finance people that's going to feed us and house us and shelter us. It's really construction that holds the pieces of civilization together.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're, by the way you responded, it causes me to have to say out loud that your career began 40 years ago.
Yeah,
Uh,
41.
and
I was an
again,
engineering intern for Lone Star Gas in 1983, so about to be 42 years, and it's interesting because, Dennis, as you know, I left the industry for 8 years, and I ran a women's foundation for 5 of those, and that was an incredible gift to me. I really just wanted to get off a plane for a while. My kids were 7 and 8, and Dennis, you and I know each other's kids, and,
yeah,
um, I it was such a gift to me because it was the first time I experienced women in community. Because there were no women to be in community with. I mean, it was me and Cynthia Paul in the beginning at FMI,
uh,
two of us, right?
yeah,
So how are you in community with people who look like you if there's nobody around that looks like you? I did everything to look like the guys. You remember this, Dennis, blue blazers, loafers, khakis, smoking cigars, playing golf,
mhm,
just trying to fit into the tribe that I belonged to, right? And what a gift it was to go run a women's foundation for 5 years. So when I came back into construction in 2013, I thought, I want to be a little bit more present to how I lift up women and help other women be successful in construction.
yeah. I don't want to seem like I'm the president of the Gretchen Gagel fan club, but truth be told, um, it never felt like or appeared that you had anywhere in your consciousness or unconsciousness the fact that I'm going to accomplish this. I want to do all these things because I want to be able to prove everybody that women can do whatever it is that they pursue.
Right.
It never looked and felt that way, and probably wasn't. Perhaps again in your thought process, you were just trying to do the best you could do,
Yeah.
to learn as much as you could learn. I mean, I forget how many. I think you've got what 10 or 15 degrees. Uh, not quite.
Or
You got just four. I knew you.
and
You
a
see.
first generation college graduate. I mean, education to me is a great way I'm a curious person. I'm a
Hmm.
curious person, and the reason I started the owner services group at FMI is that we were consulting on the contractor engineering side. Well, here I came from Ralston Purina and Coca-Cola. Barton Mallow introduced me to General Motors. I looked at how they were buying engineering and construction services, and I went, wait a minute. We're helping all these contractors be very strategic, but if they're working for a less than desirable owner and the contract's not set up from the get-go and we're squeezing money out in a low bid process, then we're not doing this in the most effective way. And so I really just saw a problem and went to Hugh Rice and said, I sat at Choppers at lunch and said, here's my business plan. I'd like to start an owner services group at FMI because I think the industry will benefit from it. And boy, was that fun, and that's how you and I met because
Hmm.
thing took off gangbusters, and
Did.
you were a big part of that.
Yeah. Well, I was there. I was present. I was present and accounted for. But thank you for saying that. All right. So let's. I do want to spend, we only have 30 minutes, which isn't enough time. Um, I'm interested. I could say, what was your motivation for writing the book? But you kind of gave a hint. I think somewhere I read something that someone approached you
Yeah.
about the idea of buying a book targeting or for the audience of women in construction. Um, if
Yeah.
that is that an was that the accurate? Is that when it came to your mind when somebody came to you and said, "I want you to write a book"?
Well, it's so ironic because, Edgar Schein, who I just adore, who passed away in January of '23, coached me for a year. He was 92 when he passed away. Such a noted author and academic, and I hired him to help me sort through what I wanted to do, and he and I decided I wasn't gonna write for a while because I just didn't have time to write, and after I did my dissertation and, you write a 172-page dissertation, you're just not that motivated to write for a while, and he passed away in January of '23, and within, oh my gosh, 30 days, Wiley knocks on my door, Callie Schulte, and says, "Hey, I've been following you on LinkedIn. Would you like to write a book about women leading in construction?" And I thought, "Oh my gosh, we just decided I wasn't gonna write for a while."
Hmm.
But I also, I've been running a women's leadership program in the pipeline industry in Australia. And after I was inducted into the National Academy of Construction in 21, that was a very liberating experience because I kind of went, I don't think I have anything left to prove to anybody anymore. Like, I don't
Mhm.
have any mountains to go climb myself. Maybe I should be helping women. And then Wiley knocks on your door and says, would you like to write a book? Because someone who's been in the industry for 40 years and has a PhD in leadership is a bit of a unique
Mhm.
thing. And
Mhm.
so I said yes, and I wrote a 120,000 word book.
Wow. So tell us about share with the audience the process.
Yeah, it was a great process. Um, there's 130 other people in the book. And similar to your book, I interviewed somewhere between 40 and 50, but I also included snippets from many of my podcasts that I've recorded with Olympians, Dr. Brendan Nelson, who was, ambassador to NATO for Australia. And so it was really a great process to, let me just say this, it's a book that most of it anybody can read in any industry, male, female, non-binary, and get a good grip on what is great leadership. What it's couched in the first chapter is talking about dominant culture and unconscious bias that causes people in lots of different situations to maybe feel like they're a bit of an outsider. And dominant culture is just a fact. It's made up, it's because of the dominant population of whatever that industry is. And
Mhm.
in construction, it happens to be primarily Caucasian male in most countries.
Right.
So it was really turned out to be much more autobiographical than I thought. There's a lot of my stories in there. But I hope that it's a gift for anybody in the industry that wants to help people understand how to be great leaders and how to help people feel like they belong.
Yeah. Do you I'm thinking of I read the summary and it talked about you providing even steps uh, to accomplish in order to try to make yourself or to learn more skills as a leader. Say
Yeah.
something more articulate about that, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really broken up into I start with self. I really believe that being a great leader starts with what I call in the book grounded self leadership. And that is grounding yourself in why you exist and what your values are. And if you think of great leaders that pop into your mind, you know what they stand for. You know what they're trying to accomplish in the world. And then from that springs kind of we've talked about the head and heart, but how do you have the courage to take that into the world? How do you have confidence combined with humility? I think one of the things I learned in my PhD was really about the and believe is the value of humility. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I don't have all the answers. I learned a lot in my PhD about critical thinking and how we use our brains, and neuroscience is the next frontier of understanding. Who knew 10 years ago we'd all be standing around cocktail parties talking about amygdala hijacks, right? But really understanding our brains and understanding our brand and how we take our brand out into the world. So that's kind of how it starts with grounded self leadership is who am I? Who is my support network? Who are my allies, my coaches, my mentors, my networks that provide support to me? People are shocked that I have a coach. I have another new coach and I'm coaching 7 executives right now and they're like, "Why do you need a coach?" And it's like, "Well, who goes into a game without a coach?"
Hmm.
Right? So, and then it goes into the depth of building relationships because that's so critical in great leadership is how we build trust and psychological safety and as Edgersheim would call them level 2 relationships because everything in the world really revolves around our ability to motivate and inspire people.
Yeah. Yeah. So if someone were to say, so why, I see your book, I see its title, and you talk about steps to do, you talk about the importance of self-leadership and all this other good stuff. If you take the women out of it, it's the same for everybody. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the very first chapter is where I try to provide some of the context and stories throughout. Um, and ironically, I was writing about unconscious bias in the book, and I flew to DC for the Associated General Contractors Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I sit on their national committee. And I got in a shared ride car in a suit, and the driver said, busy week? And I said, yeah, Kansas City, Chicago, DC, New York. Yeah, pretty busy week. And he looked at me and he said, oh, are you a flight attendant? And
Sorry.
I know. And I said, no, I'm a business executive. And then I very politely said, and this was a young man, he was probably in his 30s. And I said, do you think if I had been a man that you would have asked me that question? And he said, no, and I said, and if you thought I was in aviation, you'd probably ask if I was the pilot. And
Mhm,
Dennis, you and I traveled together all the time when we worked together at FMI.
mhm,
You probably had instances you experienced where we walked in a room and somebody thinks you're the senior person because you're the man.
mhm. Oh, yeah.
But if you haven't experienced that, and so that's the gender lens on the book. It's all block and tackle, great stuff that everybody can read, but I hope it opens people's eyes a little bit to this the lived experience of some of those, because you can laugh. I mean, when he asked me as I was a flight attendant, but I could sit here and tell you 1,000 stories about that,
Mhm.
similar to that.
Right. So, I'm taking cues off of some good questions that were framed in the material you provided me. But let me just it comes to mind, there's what I said earlier about we could have the same kind of conversation, sadly, 5, 7 or more years from now. I think the whole notion of getting social justice, which is my term, in play, is everything that everyone needs to learn about things like unconscious bias, which you talk about in your book, which I talk about regularly, because that is what it's all about. Whoever's the biggest dog in the fight is the one that everybody wants to be like. And in the construction industry, that says that's all you have to say. But we're having a lot more conversation as we transition in the political world. Politics obviously plays a role in real life and societal norms, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so there's a term, and maybe I don't know if it's in any part of your book. There's a term, an acronym that's been thrown around for years. So this evergreen episode again could have also been recorded 5 years before now, and we would be talking about DEI.
Hmm.
And now, with some degree of emotion or feeling, we're talking about it at two extremes. Hell no, or this is what we've got to do. And there's no sensible, logical, unbiased middle ground.
Mm.
Um, how can people who are going to read your book to talk about women leaders, uh, how can they benefit from trying to get a better sense of what those things are, or the right words to describe what we need in order to make the workplace, whether it's in construction or any other workplace, a better workplace for both genders, but all races, all ages, and I could go on and on with all the diversity criteria. Your
Yeah,
thoughts?
well, we need people. I mean, I sit on the construction industry culture task force for Australia too. So we're having exactly the same conversations in both countries, which was really eye opening to me. We're having the same conversations about our high rates of suicide. We're having the same conversations about shortages of people. 290,000 people short in Australia, 750,000 to a million people short in America. So we need talent. In the
Yeah,
trades, we're at less than 4% women. So
yeah.
that getting more women into construction is a business. It's a
It's an
business,
imperative.
right? But
Yeah.
but the thing that this is about respect and zero tolerance for disrespectful behavior. And I think the last chapter in the book is about leading change in the industry. And I think that's one thing, my peers inducting me into the National Academy of Construction, I've always deeply cared about lifting the entire industry. And when I have a conversation with someone and they've lost a key player, male, from their organization who is a professional athlete, and when I'm told that the reason that they left is that they weren't tough enough for our industry, that's a problem for me, right? Why do we have to be so darn tough? Why do we have to have the high rates of suicide? And there was a really great study presented at the CII CURT Joint Conference, I think 2 years ago, that showed that young men are just as disillusioned with bullying behavior, poor behavior. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants the stress. Nobody wants to be treated disrespectfully, and I think that's a great story. It's funny introducing me as former chair of the board of Brinkman. I'm actually chair for, let's see, 25 more days here.
Oh,
But
oops,
I put
jump
that
the
in the bio because I know that these are gonna be posted down the road, and I don't
right.
want people saying, "Oh, she's still the chair," but I've been on that board for 7 years. We had a female project manager who, walked into a trailer. We had 150, framers on an apartment complex and said, "I think one of them might have whistled at me." Maybe they didn't, then people kind of try and, just I didn't really hear it, and our young superintendent went out there and called all those framers down and said, "She's our boss, and you will treat her with respect," and called the owner of the company and said, "This is what happened," and he backed him up and said, "Nope, she's the boss. She needs to be treated with respect." So DE&I, inclusion, belonging, we get caught up in what this is about, but we're I'm about creating an industry where everybody is beating down our door to come to work for us, and we are picking and choosing from the most talented people in the world, and, it's not a broken industry, but it can be a better industry, and that's what motivated me to write the book.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talk about DE&I or DEI, in your book. Um, so you obviously recognize that it's the terminology that we're saddled with. In and of itself, it engenders a bias. Just as soon as you hear the three letters, I mean, it automatically means the bar is going to be lower, the bar is going to be higher, and I'm not going to be anywhere near the bar.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a tendency more to focus on inclusion, the I, and somebody, I've really been focusing on this a lot, the difference between equal and equitable. And someone told me the example that if you have a vegetarian and a meat eater, if you give them both a steak dinner, that's equal, but it's not equitable
Right.
because that's not what the vegetarian can eat, right?
Yeah.
And so I think how we make our job sites, our teams, our company, our organization, our industry feel welcoming. I heard a young man at an agency meeting talking about, "I don't see anybody that looks like me, and I don't feel comfortable, and I'm considering leaving the construction industry." And that's what I don't want to have
Right.
happen.
Right. Um, Anybody out there, any women out there, that stand out to you besides your present company excluded, of course, that stand out to you as people carrying the message that we need to be carrying on behalf of women coming into the industry?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody come to mind?
Oh, there's so many. Barb Jackson, Dr. Barbara Jackson, she was at Cal Poly for years and then University of Denver and is doing great work around women. It followed Maya Rosenquist and Martin on of Mortensen on LinkedIn. Her messaging is so spot on. In fact, I shared one of her LinkedIn posts in the book when I talk about how we through social media are telling a very positive story. There are Vicky O'Leary, Women Building Nations. I think that's the
Mhm.
name of her
Mhm.
organization. They had 9,000 trade women. And that's the other thing. You introduced me as founder of Women Thriving in Construction, a global institute. This has
Mhm.
just been incorporated in the last 3 months. And
Didn't
because
have
of
enough
my,
to do, huh?
yeah, I know. Hugh
Yeah.
Rice, when I told him about it, he goes, "You realize this is going to be hard, don't you?" And I said, I've been thinking about it for 3 years, and I'm at that point where I'm going to regret it more if I don't try. But I think because I'm having the same conversations in Australia, in America, and now my curiosity is piqued. Are we having the same conversations in Japan and India? And so we are producing, in the process of producing the first global study on the status of women. That'll be coming out in early 25 and looking to do some more global convenings about how do we take the great work of NAWIC, for example, which is pronounced Nawick in Australia just to make things confusing. But how do we throw accelerant on this, whether
Yeah.
it's through funding or um, we solve so many technical problems in this industry. Having 3% carpenters, female carpenters, electricians, pipe fitters, plumbers, some yeah, board members. I think we're doing better in the middle, frankly, with the project managers and project engineers. I think it's the high end and the trades where we could um, really make some things happen. So yes, I went and gosh darn it, started a global institute.
Well, I figured there was a reason, and so I'm glad it was there, and I'm glad I asked about it. What about, and this is a question I've heard it asked a number of times, but your answer is more will be more interesting to me, I'm sure. And it's one of your questions. What unique leadership skills are the most valuable for women advancing in construction?
Yeah. Um, I think that I try not to make gender generalizations because I know women with certain characteristics and men with certain characteristics. And I think that women, okay, so I'm going to go back to me. Let's make this a me conversation for a minute. I tried to lead just like the guys when I came in. I mean, they were all my role models. Don't be sensitive. God forbid, cry in a meeting. I mean, you just got to be tough. And I was telling the story the other day. I don't know if I ever used this with you, probably not, but or you remember it. I used to have a "so what" stamp that with a red ink pad, and I'd take junior consultants and stamp "so what" all over their reports.
You
Cruella
spared me
de
of that.
Vil,
Thank you.
right? And I think that women and men I saw an amazing presentation by a young man at a convening by in Sydney last month, creating space for people with different styles, that you don't have to be large and in charge, that it's not just the type A, loud, um, driven person, because once again, we're cutting out a portion of the population. And I had someone say to me, if I meet a woman who's reached your achievements in construction, I know you're exceptional because if you're mediocre, you're gonna get chewed up and spit out. And I
Hmm.
think creating that space for all of us to lead as our authentic beings and to bring those diverse skill sets, to bring nurturing, to bring relationship building, to bring an ability to resolve conflict, to solve problems. So I think that and once again, this is men too, but especially for women to be able to step into, and that's why I start with self, like, who am I as an authentic leader, and having the courage to show up in your own unique style.
What do you think are, again, different than the question I just asked, leadership skills most valuable? What are three or so qualities that leaders, regardless of gender, but perhaps separate in addition, women, what do you think are three or four of the qualities that give a person the opportunity to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I am a good leader?
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time on this, and now I've worked with hundreds of leaders. I go back to John Cotter's SAM, set, direction, align, and motivate, and trying to help people understand the difference between management and leadership. Management is dealing with resources and spreadsheets, and it's very important. It's creating order out of chaos. Leadership is about influencing change. And Edgar Schein said this, that leadership is about finding things that need to be done better and then convincing people to do that.
Yeah,
How do you motivate people? And that's where I think emotional intelligence comes in,
yeah,
because and that's why I studied emotional intelligence for the last dozen years with our friend Brent Darnell, right?
yeah,
Um, because how we are present to our emotions, how we keep from having knee jerk reactions that implode relationships. And gosh, and I've certainly had my share of doing this in the past, and how we're present to other people's emotions and seeing people as a whole person creates that relationship. So great leaders take the time, and it came up over and over in the interviews in the book, people talking about leaders that, um, they knew my kids' names, they knew that my mother was dying, they cared about me as a person. I wasn't just an interchangeable cog in the wheel. That is motivating that you are present to, I care about you. I see you as a whole person. I listen to you. I am interested in your ideas.
Yeah.
And, but that also just setting the direction and here's where we're going and holding people accountable. I think sometimes people think that this collaborative leadership stuff, we're just willy nilly letting everybody do what they want to do.
Yeah.
You know better than anybody.
Yeah.
I can be
You can be a D.
Yes, I can be a D, the true DI disc profile that I am,
Yeah.
and say, here's what I need you to do. We're all in an oar in the boat. I think of strategy as an 8-person rowing boat, right? And everybody's got their oar and everybody's doing the right thing in a synchronized way makes the boat goes fast. And so it's not about not holding people accountable, but it's doing that in a gracious way and saying, how can I help you be successful?
Hmm. Yeah.
Asking great questions. That's
You,
another.
there's a lot of and you used every one of I've used every word, every phrase that you've mentioned in talking about this. The one that we haven't mentioned yet, but it applies to the last phrase you just mentioned, and that is this whole notion of great leaders are servant leaders.
Yep.
Their relationship with the people they lead is to be of service to them. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's a yeah, that makes well everything that you say, and certainly because I'm a much simpler person. I talk about things in very basic terms. That's why my book is not a very big book, because that's all I could come up with. But those simple thoughts are useful. I'm getting people reacting to my little 90-second clips that I send out, my audio clips, and just that was what a great thought. That was, thank you very much. And it's pretty simple stuff, because at the end of the day, we're and this is my spiel. We're in. Yes, we build things. We build things people live in, people congregate in, people die in. All kinds of things. But what's important to recognize is that we are first and foremost we are a service business.
Mhm.
Whether it's Brinkman, whether it's Mortensen, it doesn't matter who it is. You're a service business, and you serve your customers.
Yep.
And as leaders, you serve the people that work for you as well. I like to say you need to serve the people that work for you, work with you, and your customers.
Mm.
And that's the whole ball game. And that's the way you are successful, because you build your successes on a foundation of valuing people.
Yep.
Y-
And that's why, I've been anonymously reviewed every 6 months for 22 years, I'd bet, because I used to do it back at FMI. We all have blind spots as leaders. We all do things that aren't productive in relationships, etc. And so creating those opportunities for feedback loops for people to tell you back to, Kim Scott, Radical Candor. What a great book. For people to have the courage to say, hey, Gretchen, when you assign a project, you don't give us enough detail. And how can I work on that? And I think that that's another thing. Great leaders really create those feedback loops to understand how to continue to get better. And that's why I still have a coach,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
after 42
Well,
years.
yeah, and as we come to the end, another thought that comes to my mind is that there are so many books, there are so many speakers, so many podcasters, all talking about leadership, and we still have this crisis of inertia.
Yep.
The idea of opening one's mind, thinking differently, being willing to take risks as a leader. Managers don't need to take risks because they just manage processes and people, but they don't have to inspire them. That's not part of their managing role. You know this better than I do. But as soon as, and I say to people all the time, even if you have responsibility for just one person, you have a dual set of activities you have to relate to that person with. One is managing them, where they need to go, what they need to do, but the other is to motivate them.
Yep.
So you only need one person to have to motivate people, to have to lead. It's not more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Your thoughts about that?
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to emotional intelligence because being able to create a pause button so that you're consistently enacting the skills of great leadership And it's a very complex, we've overused this VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, but the world is getting more complicated, more information being thrown at you, more pressure. Mental health is at an all time low globally, and that creates more triggering. Great leaders have that pause button and stop and think, what's about to come out of my mouth? And is it going to help this relationship, or is it going to serve those I lead or not? And I think
Right.
that's really a critical point.
Self-management. It's easy. It's easy, until you open your mouth, and then all
Yes.
of a sudden it becomes difficult. Last question, last ask. I'm sure as you reflect on the journey of writing this book, I look forward to reading it. I'm sure I'm going to get the friend and family discount. I did notice, I'm sure it's worth every dime,
I
Gretch.
know.
Yeah, but that's Wiley for you. And I like Wiley because actually I'm a big proponent of their behavioral assessment instruments, the Wiley suite of the everywhere disc stuff. I use that in a lot of stuff that I do. I think it's wonderful. I think it's so helpful and to give people, some facts about themselves. Take that thought, I need to learn to self-manage a bit. Why don't I? What does it mean and how do I do it? Which I think is great. But out of all those pages, what comes to mind is the most inspirational, motivating notion you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, the book closes with a story where I was in a little town called Foster. I did a bunch of road trips in Australia on the coast and the beautiful beaches when I was writing the book. And I checked into a hotel and she said, "Oh, go down to the shore. There's dolphins in the evening." And I walked down there and I'm looking around. I can't see dolphins anywhere. I'm like, oh my God, am I an idiot? Where are the dolphins? And I started to go back to my hotel and I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And I walked over to a woman and I said, "Hey, are there dolphins here?" And she pointed at a 90-degree angle. It was kind of a cove. And this beautiful sunset was happening. And these dolphins were just easing through the water. I took a beautiful picture. And the motto is, it's okay to ask for help, right?
Yeah,
I think that's another sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's a sign of strength to have a coach, to have allies. I really this book, and yes, 120,000 words, that wasn't what I was shooting for, but that's what it ended up being.
yeah,
I want it to be like a reference book. There's chapters on team dynamics, there's chapters on building organization culture, which is another thing I studied in my PhD. I
yeah,
want it to be a book that sits on your shelf and you say, "Gosh, I need some help with this."
yeah,
And that's why I have 130 other people in the book because I've
yeah,
Anna Mears, Olympian, broke her neck, came back and competed in the Olympics 7 months later. Other people with inspirational things. But yeah, it's okay to ask for help and to continue to learn and raise your hand and say, "I want to get better as a leader." I ask
yeah,
people that. Do you aspire to be a great leader? If you do, you'll work on it.
yeah. Gretch, or Gretchen, or Dr. Gagel,
I
thank you.
answer to all of those.
Did we cover enough topic that it'll be relevant to help people understand why they need to read your book?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. And yeah, I really appreciate, Dennis, you having me as my first podcast about the book. It's exciting to get it out there, a little scary, but as you know, putting a book out into the
Yeah,
universe
it's a
is
big deal.
a bit of a nerve-wracking thing. But yeah, I'm really excited about it and I appreciate
Good.
you having me as a guest.
Yeah, I look forward to reading your book, and I look forward to seeing you again and again in the coming years.
Thanks for joining us today for this episode of the Soft as Steel podcast with your host, Dennis Duran. Dennis is the author of Soft as Steel and a leading speaker and trainer for organizations across many industries and verticals. To learn more about the work Dennis is doing to activate soft skills in the workplace, contact him at dennisduranspeaking.com. Be sure to check out his book, Soft as Steel, on Amazon or wherever books are sold. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you'd like to get your podcasts. And please remember to share this episode with your friends, colleagues, and anyone you feel would benefit from the conversation. We'll see you next time on the Soft as Steel podcast with Dennis Duran.